All right, so in the previous video, we used the extrude tool to kind of make this really ugly, rudimentary, I don't know, spaceship, which was just kind of a happy accident. I wasn't intending to make anything like that, but that's just what kind of came out when I started putting things together. So that's fine. That was using the extrude tool. Maybe it's more of a car. I don't know. It doesn't matter what it is. That was using the extrude tool. So now I want to go through and I want to look at creating other ways to create new geometry. The extrude tool is just one way, and again, that's face and extrude. It's really powerful. It gives you more geometry to work with, but there are other ways. So in order to do that, I'm going to come back to object mode, and I'm going to add a new mesh cube. So now I have a separate object from my original one, and it's just kind of the default cube again. But I want to add detail to this in a way that is different from extrude. So I'm going to come back to edit mode. And I'm already working in faces. So I'm going to pull the face out here to get something that's about the same size maybe as my spaceship, race car, whatever it is. I talked previously in the other video about starting off with a bunch of clay and then modifying it to be what I wanted it to be. This is kind of how I'm going to do it this time. There is a edge loop tool, a loop cut. And this is, I usually just call this adding edge loops. So I'm going to use a loop cut. And as you click, you see that it kind of defaults right into the center of whatever space you're using. Right? So I'm going to do that, and as you click, it adds on another edge loop. So I've created a whole bunch of edge loops now on my object. Now it's as easy as coming in and selecting my edges and then moving them around to be kind of the shape that I want them to be. And I have a lot of control over this. Right, but holding down Shift allows you to select more edges than just one. And if you select a whole bunch of edges, like I'm doing here, you can keep holding down Shift and select them all if you want. And then I'm going to use the scale tool, and I'm going to scale them in together. In fact, I'm going to come back and I'm going to select these secondary loops here so I can scale all of these in together. So I get something that looks like that. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to select just these bottom rows. Again, holding down Shift and just left clicking while I'm in the edge selection tool. And then I'm going to just kind of move them down and scale them together to try to get a similar shape to what I have over on the other side. Now this isn't exact, it's not the exact same shape, but the principle is there and it is getting closer. Let's see what I'm missing. I need some of these fins, I guess. So what we're going to do is I've switched to vertex selection by clicking on the vertex up here. And with vertex selection, I'm going to select some things, and then I'm going to start to make it a fin. Again, holding down Shift, I can select more than one. And as I select them, I'm just using the move tool to move them around and hopefully give myself that kind of fin look. And it's close. It's definitely not exactly what I had in the other one, but it kind of gets the demonstration of how you can use edge loops to get a shape that you want. Now, in both of these, what I've done is I've created the geometry, whether it's through an extrude, as I did over here, or through adding an edge loop, as I did over here. Once you add the geometry, you still have to come back in and modify it, either using edge selection, face selection, or you can use vertex selection. And all three of these ways give you some control over the shape of the object. It just depends on what you're trying to shape. Sometimes it's better to shape the edges and move those. Sometimes it's better to move the faces. And it really depends on what you're trying to do. So the skill that you need to be really comfortable with is going to be switching between edge mode, face mode, and vertex mode, and then also switching between move, rotate, and scale. Those tools are what you're going to use to make up 90% of the designs or shapes that you're going to make. Now, it gets a lot more intricate, and you end up with a lot more faces, but the root mechanic is either extrude or add edge loops, move, rotate, and scale. Now, you do have some hotkeys for a lot of these things, but it's easy for me just to come up and select exactly what I'm selecting. It's just easier to show on the video. It's easier to remember. We'll get into the hotkeys later, but it's easier for everybody to know just kind of where everything is by where I'm clicking. And if you follow my mouse, I will try and hit the control button to highlight my mouse on what I'm clicking on. I think that just makes it a little bit more convenient. So again, still working on this same kind of shape. And again, when you hold down Shift, you can select more than one object or more than one element at a time. And that's it. That's kind of the gist of the Insert Edge Loop tool. And again, it's found right here. There is a knife tool. I would not recommend using the knife tool. It doesn't always create good, what's called topology. You don't always end up with four-sided squares. So try to use the loop cut. And then there's also this offset edge loop. It does a pretty similar thing, right? But it allows you to click and drag it instead of placing things in the exact center. So you would come in, you would select an edge. Then you would use the offset edge loop cut tool. That's not a great example here. Let's pick a different edge. Pick this edge. Offset edge loop tool. And it creates new loops, or creates new edges. And this is cool. It gives you a little bit of control over it. But you have to make sure that you select the entire edge loop before you try to do that. It's a cool thing. It's another way to get details a little bit faster. But you can always just use a regular loop cut and make sure that you are able to modify and move the shapes that you want. And you can add a ton of detail, right? You can add thousands upon thousands of vertexes to work with. The general best practice is to just add a few at a time, get the shape you want, add a few more, get the shape you want. Don't try to put in 10,000 vertexes and then shape them like you would with clay. You always want to kind of get a general shape and then add to get more detail. So this video was about inserting edge loops to an object and then modifying those vertexes, edges, and faces to get the shape that you wanted.